Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. All of our WNST programming, including our community and charity series, brought to you by our friends at Cole Roofing and Gordian Energy Systems. Bill Cole's going to be here this week to discuss all things Terrapins, as we sort of were buying in here, Luke Jones. I was believing a little bit. I've now seen them scuffle against Michigan twice. I'm convinced they're not the best team in the Big Ten. That much is sure. I'm also convinced that they've got a little ways to go here over the next couple weeks to get ready for Big Ten play, as well as getting ready for March Madness. It feels like it's slipping a little bit right now, and I thought this team would be getting better, and I don't necessarily see that right now, Luke.
Yeah, I agree, and there's one common denominator here.
Here we go, going to the Terps. Here we go.
How many years have we talked about this with different players, and it seems like it's the same issues all the time. It seems like it's a case of very rarely getting better late in the season, and I have a tough time putting it on the kids over and over and over. I hear Mark Turgeon talk about the schedule and how good the league is and how young the Terps are. And look, I'm not saying there isn't validity to some of those variables, but at some point in time, you just keep seeing this same movie over and over and over. And I really like some of the young players on this team. I really do. And I've wanted to buy into the idea that I could see this team making a run. And then, well, this week happened. And the
Penn State loss was embarrassing, and look, the Michigan game they kind of got back in, but I think they could play 10 times in Maryland and be lucky to win one or two. I mean, I just think Michigan's a better team.
I think they're a better team. I think they're better coached. I think Beeline's a better coach than Mark Turgeon, and at some point in time, you start to ask the question: is it ever going to get better than this? I think Turgeon recruits well. I think they certainly have talent. Take a look at how guys like Kevin Huerter are doing in the NBA that have come through. They've had talented players, but at some point, I do wonder if we're really seeing progress or if this is just kind of the same story that we always see. Now, Sunday's game, to your point, Michigan's a heck of a team. I mean, this is a team that's vying for a number one seed. That I think most bracketologists right now have them on the 2 line. So it's not as though there's any shame in losing to Michigan, but
you get the feeling 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, they would lose to Michigan all over again, and they might lose to them again next week if they get the chance. And if they had to play them in the NCAA tournament, or anyone like them, I would say they're in over their head unless something supernatural happens. And look, supernatural is Bruno Fernando, right? It is Cowan. There are these players individually, Michigan, Purdue, these teams, Michigan State. We've seen all these teams this year. They got nothing on the talent that Maryland has or even the depth this year. It's just at the end of the day, if Bruno Fernando is going to take over, he's got to take over. Period, right? For me.
Yeah, and I think the 2 names you mentioned, Cowan and Fernando, were 9 for 28 from the field on Sunday. I mean, that's not good enough. They didn't shoot the ball well enough.
Not against the 2 seed, right?
For me, what was really frustrating was more so the first half. Michigan shot under 35% from the field in the first half. Maryland looked like they were in a position where they could take a lead into halftime, and then they had that 6-minute scoring drought late in the first half, and Michigan goes up 28-24 at intermission. Look at the last possession of the first half for both teams. Cowan takes an ill-advised 3 with time on the clock, and then Michigan scores right before the buzzer. So I don't know. I feel like the names change, but we talk about the same exact issues year after year here, and it's not as though it's terrible. I mean, Maryland is 5th in the Big Ten right now. This is a good league this year, but with the week that they just had, they're now in jeopardy of losing the double bye in the Big Ten tournament. And if you want to try to improve your seeding and build some momentum going into the NCAA tournament, you'd like to make a run in the Big Ten tournament to get to the championship.
Yeah, you don't like the weather here. How do you think Chicago's going to be a day early next week, right?
Right. So it's just, I think it's frustrating. And again, in isolation, there's nothing wrong with losing to Michigan, but on the heels of what was just a god-awful, embarrassing performance at Penn State on Wednesday night, there's just no sugarcoating how awful that was. And you and I didn't get a chance on the radio to lament how poor that performance was. But to follow it up then with they battled, sure. They didn't get blown out. It was a close game. I'll hear all of that. But at some point in time, if you're truly getting better, you regroup and you're ticked off and you play that well against Michigan on Sunday that you get a win, especially when one of Michigan's top 3 scorers was not in the lineup on Sunday. So it's not as though the Wolverines were playing at full strength. So just disappointing. And again, you kind of look at some of the things that hurt them. Scoring droughts, again. Even though the turnovers weren't a big issue, they only had 9 turnovers, but a few of them came at some rough spots. And I think more than anything, even though they hit a couple outside shots late, they hit the 2 early threes, and then they didn't do, I think they were 1 for their next 16, 1 for their next 14, something like that, beyond the arc. You're just going to have a really tough time beating a good opponent when you're not hitting outside shots. And I think it all added up to a really frustrating loss. And on top of that, when you consider that Maryland was celebrating the 100 years of Maryland basketball over the weekend, and Steve Blake and Joe Smith and Gary Williams and different players of the past were in the building on Sunday, even more frustrating not to come away with a win or a better performance. The opportunities were there. That was not a Michigan team playing at
they felt like they wanted to get beat. I mean, they felt like they just let the Terps in the game, and it felt to me, and I tweeted early on, I was watching the game, I'm like, this is the kind of game the Terps would win to get a little momentum. We'd feel good about them for a couple of weeks, right? Going into the tournament, because they would have this kind of a win at home. Joe Smith's there, Steve Blake's there. Well, wait, just down all the legends were out, Planks running around, giving, T-shirts out and hats to everybody, and everybody's, Maryland, we're all behind you. And then they lose. I felt like it was a very, very winnable, in the purview of a game that Turgeon could win to get some momentum. And it was sitting there the whole time. And I felt like they played very uninspired. I was very, very disappointed in Cowan and Fernando for not having a bigger, better game at home on that kind of a day, on that kind of a stage. And I also thought about Fernando, like, he's not going to be here next year no matter what, I sort of guess, right? So I felt like it was a little bit of an exclamation point for him in his career that maybe 8 years from now he'll come back on senior day or whatever and be a part of it. But it was less than memorable. I was kind of disappointed I didn't get in the car and go down on Sunday when I saw the hype, and Don Marcus is putting pictures up of Johnny Rhodes, players and stuff from the old era. And I thought, man, it would have been a fun day to be there, except that then they dribbled the ball, and it was not a good outcome. I think it was a day it really could have energized the program to some degree, and that's now lost. Like, they won't have that opportunity again, and I think that's unfortunate. Another thing I want to say about Turgeon talking, and look, I'm not anti-Turgeon. I don't know Turgeon. I'm completely a 5 on him. I'm not pro him. I'm not anti him. They could do better. They could do worse. Fine. They've had to move conferences. A lot of things going on. But I hated that he sat on CBS before the game with Bonner and said something about, well, we don't get to play a lot of home games. Well, dude, don't sell your games to Madison Square Garden then, and get your ass beat, not getting out of bed against Illinois. Like, we don't have a lot of home games. Like, what? I mean, you make the schedule, bro. You know what I mean? Like, come on. I mean, saying we've played so many games on the road, I thought that was just sleepy. I thought that was one of the weakest things I've heard him say before a game, honestly.
Well, admittedly, I did not see the pregame interview, but I'm not surprised to hear that. Just like after Wednesday night's loss at Penn State, he was very quick to point out we've had a great year. Yeah, Michigan had to go on the road today too, so you might want to win. Well, and look, I mean, they did have a stretch where they played a lot of road games in the Big Ten schedule. Sure, I acknowledge that, but I don't know. There's too much of that with Mark Turgeon. They also lost to Seton Hall. You know what I mean? Come on. Right, exactly, and. They got blown out by Penn State, didn't even show up a weight class. You saying that he's a 5 for you, to me, is the entire problem with this program right now. It's a 5. He doesn't inspire me. I mean, he's never been on my show. I mean, I don't know him. There's nothing about him that makes me want to, like, run and save him other than Pino, who I've known since he was 11 years old. You know what I mean? I mean, putting the media part of it aside, just when was the last time? When did you really feel like a Mark Turgeon team exceeded expectations since he's been at Maryland? I would say maybe Melo Trimble's freshman year. I think that was a year where there weren't great expectations, and then Trimble came on the scene and was really good. I mean, remember how good he was as a freshman. I think the issue with Melo was you never really felt like he got all that much better. And in some ways, people would say regressed over his 3 years. But since that year, since his freshman year, and that was a while ago at this point, when have you really felt like a Maryland team met and or exceeded expectations? I have a tough time pointing to any one year, and even the year where they had the hired guns with Suleiman and Diamond Stone and Robert Carter, and you go down the list. I mean, that team, they made it to the Sweet 16, sure, but that was a team that was top 5 and looked like they could be a Final Four team, and they didn't even get close to that. So I don't know. It's just you mentioning he's a 5. I kind of feel like that's what this program has become. It's not awful by any means, and they've made some NCAA tournaments, sure, but it's not what it was with Gary Williams, and even really over the first, from the time that Joe Smith and Keith Booth arrived until, for that decade, it's not close to what it was for that period of time. It used to be for a while, for a long while in College Park, the expectation was to at least get to the Sweet 16, and Gary Williams did that quite a few times, as we know, and obviously got there to even greater heights in 2001 and 2002. And we know that Williams didn't maintain that. I get that. I'll acknowledge that. But at the same time, you can't keep selling me on Mark Turgeon's this great coach if this program that has the resources that it has is in a basketball hotbed in the D.C., Baltimore area. And the best you can do is you're kind of getting to the NCAA tournament, and maybe you win a game, maybe not. And that's kind of been the ceiling here, and that's just, I don't think it's good enough. And what really concerns me is I'm not seeing enough signs that it's going to get better. I don't. This kind of feels like this is it. And he brings in some good players. Don't get me wrong. I think he's a good recruiter. But
yeah, my question is, if they're going to go into the tournament as a 7 seed next week, how are they going to beat a 2? They just saw a 2, right? Like that, and I don't believe that that's so. Then they don't get to the second weekend, and then we're sitting here doing radio. I guess I get the math right here because they moved everything back a week. So I guess their elimination night would be the 23rd or the 24th. So we'll be sitting here on the 25th, and they'll be out of the tournament again if they don't get to the Sweet 16, and we'll be saying, well, what happened? They were a top 25 team. They didn't get to the 6th. They were 17th ranked last week. So and I think that then the disappointment sets in. It's different than at Penn State or at these other places where it doesn't matter. Here, football's never going to matter unless kids drop dead. So the basketball has to matter. And when you're not playing on the second weekend of the playoffs, you don't matter.
Yeah,
enough.
And I think that's where the frustration lies. I think this program at times has mattered and mattered big time, but it hasn't been that way under Mark Turgeon, and it's been very fleeting. Like I said, Melo Trimble's freshman year and the year where Stone and Suleiman and they had the kind of the, I don't want to say mercenary, but it kind of felt that way. It was that hired gun year where you knew it was a one-time shot with that group of players. So they're okay, I don't want to say they're bad. I mean, they're 21-9. They're 5th in the Big Ten. They are a top 25 team, but over the last month or so, you've struggled to really look at them and say, oh, okay, they're going to make a run. They go to Michigan State and lose. They lose to Illinois at Madison Square Garden. They lose at Wisconsin. They lose at Michigan 2 weeks ago and follow that up with Saturday's loss. And then you have a game like they had against Penn State. I mean, you have that kind of resume. So they're 5-6 over their last 11, if I'm looking at the schedule correctly. What about that makes you feel that they're suddenly going to win 4 or 5 games in a row and do something special in either the Big Ten tournament or the NCAA tournament? So It's just this week has really soured me on trying to really embrace this team. Like I said, I like the young players on this team. I think there is some real talent here. Is it improving to the degree that it needs to improve? That's where I question it, and that's where I continue to see the same issues: long scoring droughts and turnovers and bad play coming out of timeouts.
Poor shot selection.
Yeah, things of that nature. And look, I mean, on Sunday they missed a lot of shots, and some of those were good shots that they missed. So that's going to happen sometimes. And if we were just talking about Sunday losing to Michigan, I'd shrug my shoulders and say, hey, they lost to a top 10 team. But when it's the entire body of work that continues to add up, and you very rarely have those great wins over Michigan. They beat Purdue, but on the flip side, then you have a loss to Illinois. You have a loss at Penn State. So are you really making up for some of those bad losses with enough great wins? That's where I challenge and say, no, you're not. And even go back to the win at Iowa. Take a look at what Iowa has done since then, and that win's not looking as impressive as it did a couple weeks ago. So they're a top 25 team. They're solid. I don't want to make it out that they're bad. They're not terrible or anything like that, but I think there was some excitement at the beginning of Big Ten play, especially when they went on that winning streak, that this team could be really, really dangerous, and I'm just not seeing hard evidence that they're better than they were 2 months ago, and that's kind of been a theme with Mark Turgeon teams.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, and Luke at WNST.net. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at the Model Lyric. I was with George Lopez. By the way, George Lopez was unbelievable on Saturday night. We laughed and laughed and laughed more. Doobie Brothers a couple of weeks away. Joe Bonamassa coming up a week after next as well. Britt Floyd on May 2nd. The Frank Zappa hologram show is May 3rd. I've got that circled. That's Kentucky Derby weekend as well. I'm going to be talking to some of the folks that make the hologram. So a hologram show, I'm interested in that. You've heard the ads here at WNST. Get out to model-lyric.com to learn more about all the incredible stuff they're doing down there. John Nicoletta, all of our friends down there, including Rudy. Bill Maher on June 9th and JoJo Siwa. I got some friends with daughters. We had JoJo Siwa on from Nickelodeon last year at the Super Bowl. You can find that out in our WNST audio vault as well as on our YouTube channel. If your daughters and your kids are like, hey, Nestor sat with JoJo Siwa. And that show's kind of like big time. So anyway, that's June 12th. Lots of stuff happening. The Model Lyric, there's always magic there. I've been there a bunch this month with the Manhattans and the Delphonics that were down there. What else did I do? John Mellencamp was there last week too. So Model Lyric, model-lyric.com. Also, our friends at Sporticulture. Flower time is here. We're getting into the spring right now, and the flowers around me on my WNST set can be yours. Go to Sporticulture. That's sporticulture.com. They're local. They're right out toward Frederick on the edge of Howard County. They've also got lava lamps that they've threatened to send me a lava lamp that's going to be here in the studio. I said make sure it's purple or orange for this season. Be mourning the Orioles all year long. The Lee Tessier team is Baltimore's premier realty team and the folks I trust with my real estate transactions with over 50 years of experience helping local buyers and sellers just like yourself, locating the finest properties and then negotiating the best deals. LeeTessier.com is the way to do that. They keep up on all the government stuff and the developments and the market condition, all the stuff you don't have to worry about. Just leave it up to them. You got to get your place cleaned up. I found that when I put my place on the market. You do have to do some work, but leaving all the heavy lifting up, that's up to Lee and his team. LeeTessier.com. Also a good man I met on the leukemia lymphoma trail with my wife. It'll be 5 years next week since she was diagnosed, so we're in on that. And hey, man, love's all around. We got stories all over the place. Luke Jones is here. He is Baltimore Luke. You can find us both out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. Luke, I want to give you just a second here to stretch out on the history of Maryland basketball and what we saw on Sunday. And I guess Plank brought everybody in and bought a mistake and, did it all up. And Gary Williams was there, I guess, on Saturday. I didn't even know the event existed until Sunday. But a real homecoming for Terps basketball. It's kind of cool. I mean, I'm 50 now, right? So to see the whole gamut, all the guys going back into the 70s, I thought it was kind of a fun thing that it would have been nicer if the team would have shown up, for sure.
Absolutely. I think to have an event like that when you do have a history that Maryland has. And let's face it.
A basketball history, right?
Yeah, I mean, the basketball history, is it North Carolina or Duke? No, but it's better than a lot of programs out there. And, go back to the 70s with Lefty and, so many great players of that era, and the 80s leading up to what the tragedy of Len Bias. And, that was before, all of that was before my time. I mean, Len Bias, I was 3 years old when he died. But when I think of what Gary Williams did to resurrect that program, and I think about guys like Joe Smith and Keith Booth and Johnny Rhodes and X-Ree Hip and that crew, and getting to the Sweet 16 a couple times, and some of the things that they were able to do, and then how the program just grew from there. I mean, it's special. I mean, those are some of my favorite memories growing up watching Maryland basketball. And, as a 10-year-old kind of daydreaming about the possibility of Maryland winning in the national championship. And when I was 10, they were just coming off of sanctions and no TV and all of that. And to kind of think where they were when Joe Smith and Keith Booth got there, and what they were able to do, and then just that progression to the point that Lonnie Baxter and Juan Dixon and Steve Blake and those guys show up. I mean, those are some of my favorite memories growing up, and that's why when I see where Maryland has been, even going back to the end of the Gary Williams era, to be fair to Mark Turgeon, that's where it is frustrating to know that this team 17 years ago won a national championship, and they haven't really been all that close to getting back to that level. There have been a couple years where you thought it was possible. Think of Gravis Vasquez his senior year, and Corey Lucius hits the three for Michigan State against Maryland, a heartbreaker. But there haven't been too many moments like that where you thought, this Maryland team might be special. We thought that maybe a few years back.
I thought when they were in Minnesota beating up on Duke that it was amazing they came back the next year and won, right? Like sort of like the Ravens after the Cundiff miss and the Lee Evans drop.
No doubt. It's funny you mention that because that was always a comparison that I thought,
well, the Orioles in 83 after 79 would also have been a little bit of that, right?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the 1970 Orioles after 69, I mean, you always love the redemption stories. You don't like that a team has to have that redemption because it means they went through something really disappointing, if you're talking about in terms of wins and losses. But, I mean, Maryland, that was such a great story. And when you think about all the individuals on that national championship team, Juan Dixon's story well documented. Byron Mouton, another one. I mean, it's just... it was just a team that was really easy to root for, and I think for anyone who remembers that, you want to see Maryland experience that again at some point. And where they are right now here in 2019 with this coach, I don't know. I don't want to say never. It can't happen. And Mark Turgeon's not the worst coach in the league or anything crazy like that, but I see some of the great players come back, some of the great teams come back, and I want to experience that. I want to see the University of Maryland experience that again. And at this point, I'm not sure it's going to happen this year. Not sure it's going to happen in the coming years. I don't know. I just don't know if they're heading in the direction that you want to head in, other than just saying, okay, they're okay. They're pretty solid. They're pretty good sometimes. I want to see Maryland be great again one day, and I don't know. Maybe that won't happen, but
it felt doable in this conference, right? It never felt like you could out-recruit Duke or North Carolina. It feels like, given where the move they made, that there should be some years where they could have the best talent in the conference. And this year, you thought maybe Michigan came on, right? I mean, Purdue was also, Wisconsin has come on through the course of the year. Nebraska's had. So all those teams have been ranked at various points. But I would say Maryland probably had the second or third best talent in the conference this year. Now, how that turns out remains to be seen because they're about to exit the top 25, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know if they're going to exit the top 25. I mean, 2 losses at 17th.
Been a bad week.
But it was a bad week, sure. Your point is they're going to drop significantly, and yeah. But that's where you go back to how much of it is talent, how much of it is cultivating that talent and shaping that talent, and that's where I do have some questions, and I'll continue to have questions until Mark Turgeon proves me wrong. I would be glad to say I was dead wrong about him if we're talking about Maryland in the Final Four a month from now, or if even talking about them getting to an Elite Eight. I mean, they don't have to win the national championship, but show me a sign that this thing is really improving, and it's not just a case of you bring in some good players, they're here for a year or two, they leave, you bring in more good players, but you never really get to that next level. That's where I want to see Mark Turgeon prove his critics wrong.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. I did find some old Maryland Duke ticket stubs and press passes and stuff. I'm going to be sharing a bunch of my memories this week, especially with my dad. My dad and I went to a Duke game, and I found the ticket the other day, so I'm going to be sharing that. My dad's 100th birthday, March 5th. Be talking about dads and fathers. It was my unofficial Father's Day every year on March 5th here. If you've been listening to WNST for any period of time, you know back in the 90s and the turn of the century, every year on March 5th, I turn the day over to fathers and stories and have all the old tapes and stuff. But I'm going to be talking to folks all week long about it and sharing some memories out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, everywhere that we post that stuff, including the buyatoyota.com audio vault that's there 24 hours a day for all the stuff you might miss. Going to be doing some Terps this week. Going to do some college basketball around here. We are launching Baltimore Positive. We're monitoring all things Orioles and getting ready for the silly season of free agency and draft time as the Ravens get back from Indianapolis without Alex Collins and madness on the other side of the end of the week last week, and the C.J. Mosley video too, which most of us thought to be benign, but it'll be interesting to see whether he's going to be a Raven this week. I am Nestor. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.